Peek behind the mask and learn the life story of Tatsu Yamashiro, the woman who would be Katana, as we dig into the pages of The Other History of the DC Universe #3 from John Ridley. So then, as we open up, it's the 80s in Japan. Tatsu is living a content life with her husband and 2 sons. The only problem is her brother-in-law is a yakuza who not so secretly lusts after her, and when she turns down his advances, he decides to murder her husband and burn down their family home with the 2 children still inside. It's in that moment an enraged Tatsu will make a decision that will go on to define her for the rest of her life. She wrestles away the sword from her attacker and uses it to cut him into ribbons. Now, despite all the technological advancements of Japanese culture at the time, socially, they were still very much behind the curve when it came to topics of equality and especially women's issues. Despite being the victim of a truly horrible crime, Tatsu was seen as cursed in the eyes of her very superstitious countrymen, who still probably wouldn't have given her a job anyway, given how older single women are treated in Japan, even to this day. Look up the concept of Christmas cake if you don't believe me. I promise your jaw is gonna hit the ground. With few options left, Tatsu took to living on the streets and doing whatever it took to survive. Her fortune would end up changing in a major way, however, the next time she chose to use her sword to defend an art dealer who was being attacked in a back alley. This man, Tadashi, we discover, was a real mover and shaker in the world of stolen artwork. He also had a literal list of enemies and a bunch of yen for Tatsu should she want to become his own personal assassin. And thus the legend of Katana was born on that day, the kill-crazy martial artist with the magic sword that can literally take your soul. Only here's the thing, in a bold departure from the original comic text, Katana says that she was never a martial artist. At best, she was a pretty good gymnast. And yeah, she certainly talked to her sword, but not because it was magic or anything, it was because she was working through some serious PTSD. But hey, if people wanted to believe in the racist stereotype that because she was Asian, she was some expert martial artist, she was gonna let them do it. Now, the next target on Katana's hit list turns out to be a man named General Karn, a weapons dealer operating out of Markovia, who just so happened to sell the very sword that killed Tatsu's family. And if you know your comic book history, you'll know that it was around this time that Katana had her first meeting with the Batman. Admittedly, she had complicated feelings about him right out of the gate, but those would actually morph and change over the years, as we'll see. While she certainly respected Batman for creating his own legend as a crime fighter, she found it hard to believe that he did everything that he did without actually killing anybody. Again, showcasing that Tatsu did ultimately have a pretty cold and fatal worldview. It was after this mission the new super team, the Outsiders, was officially formed. Tatsu admits she felt a fair amount of kinship with Black Lightning Jefferson Pierce right away because, like her, he too had lost a family, only where hers were murdered, his were very much alive. They just didn't want to see him anymore because of his superhero work. Katana also says that in the early days she felt the name Batman and the Outsiders was deeply patronizing, like they were some sort of backup band. Then again, to American sensibilities, what could possibly be more outsider than an Asian woman, a black man, a foreign royal, a genetic freak, and a lady with amnesia? But she bit her tongue because even back then she knew that Batman always had a funny way of getting exactly what he wanted no matter the situation. Now, Katana had plenty of reason to be apprehensive about a move to America. After all, American history is filled with Asian exclusion acts, massacres you've probably only learned about in the last couple years, not to forget the massive glaring issue of internment, but we'll cover that later. As Tatsu so eloquently puts it, America is a place that loves co-opting Asian culture, Asian cuisine, Asian art, but rarely ever seems to show the same love and appreciation for real Asian people, herself included. It was while in America, Batman also decided to make Gabrielle Doe, the young amnesiac woman named for the unknown dead, Katana's ward. He did this without asking, of course, even though Tatsu had shown zero maternal qualities following her own children's death, but I guess she was still a better choice than the guys on the team. Despite her early objections, Katana would ultimately have to admit Batman was onto something here. Raising and caring for Gabby helped Tatsu feel human again and let people love her again for the first time in many years. On the superhero front, the Outsiders' biggest foes around this era was a group of ultra-patriotic, government-backed villains called the Force of July. The Force attacked anyone they felt was being too subversive, which covered a lot of ground. Katana related their jingoistic violence to the real-life murder of one Vincent Chen, a young Chinese man who was murdered by two American auto workers who thought he was some kind of Japanese spy. The two perpetrators were ultimately let off murder charges because, get this, the judge had been in a Japanese internment camp during World War II, and much like these men, even after the Outsiders defeated the 4th of July, their crimes were never made public and justice was never really served. The lack of any real lasting restorative justice is sadly a recurring theme in Katana's life as she looks back and notes events like the sad story of Tara Markov, sister of Geoforce, one of her teammates. Tara, an already mentally unstable girl, was trafficked and raped by the super assassin known as Deathstroke, as well as used as a tool in his battle with the Teen Titans. Understandably, Tatsu sees a lot of herself in Tara. She too was a victim of an evil, powerful man, yet history remembers this poor girl as crazy, while Deathstroke, on the other hand, gets to reap a reputation of being a super cool man's man, despite being canonically a pedophile. What is especially damning about this is that when you stop and consider that DC has actually had the opportunity to retcon this out of continuity many times before, but they never have. It's at this point in history, too, the Outsiders would begin to move out from under Batman's shadow and strike out on their own. Perhaps this was always the idea Batman had for them, put them on a team so they could prop each other up and end up stronger than they were when they came in. It's with her new free time Katana vows to make a pilgrimage to Nevada, where Japanese Americans were interned during World War II following Pearl Harbor. Tatsu opines on the cruel irony of American GIs, many of them Asian themselves, fighting to save people overseas from terrible fates in camps, while back home their own government was locking up their family members. A grim reminder that as much as we may like to tell ourselves otherwise, every culture, every people is capable of great and horrifying atrocity. And that while we may often talk about our rights that protect us and that we hold dear, historically it's been shown time and time again that rights can be stripped away from you at any time for any reason. Now, when the 90s began to roll around, America's view on Asians began to shift and change. Japan and China were seen as less scary as their economies had begun to flag behind. Instead, the scorn was heaped on Koreans, who were treated as invaders in the inner city. Some of the worst and most, unfortunately, forgotten violent crimes at this time were actually African American on Korean, a sad, grim reminder of just how hate can breed more hate, even amongst groups of people who are already facing great oppression. Now, what was the major event happening in the world of comics around this time? Well, the death of Superman, of course. Katana admits that her and the other Outsiders had critical opinions of Superman, how he was the definition of an alien, yet despite all of that, he managed to fit into American culture just fine, no doubt because of how he looked and where he was raised. But despite all that, Tatsu admits that his loss affected everyone. Superman was the world's first and last defense. His death changed something in the superhero community, a kind of loss of innocence that they could never get back, and just as quick as he died, he was back to life too, a changed man. Tatsu began to think a lot more about death over the next few years, even as she lost her beloved surrogate daughter Gabby along the way. Eventually, Katana would learn what laid on the other side of death as she met her toughest opponent yet in the form of Lady Shiva. Shiva sought to steal her now legendary Soul Taker sword for, get this, Katana's old boss Tadashi. Katana would end up getting stabbed with her own signature weapon, but ultimately cheat death through sheer force of will. In fact, Tatsu even says that she briefly was reunited with her dead family on the other side, but doubted that they would ever actually recognize the woman she's become in the years since. In a nice bit of things coming full circle, Katana would ultimately cross Tadashi's name off her own list, just one more powerful man who wronged her. With his death, Katana had hoped that she may finally be free from the ghosts of her past, but it's left open-ended. As Tatsu reflects on her life lived, she says that she never truly ever felt like a hero, but a fighter who was capable of heroic things every so often. And while she hated the name at first, she has ultimately come to love the title of Outsider because, as she has finally learned, outsiders may stand apart, but they never stand alone. And so that was the other history of the DC Universe issue number 3, and once again, John Ridley manages to deliver a complex and challenging comic work. I'm especially amazed at how the writer manages to craft such a cohesive narrative for a character like Katana, who has probably been on more teams and more canceled books than just about any other hero at DC. And then to even go a step further by making that metatext the backbone of the book and Katana's own quest for identity and agency in a world that so often overlooks her. It feels different from the struggle we saw with Jeff and Mal in the previous 2 issues, but one that also has a lot of overlap as well. I also appreciate this book for not just looking at Tatsu as an Asian person living in America, but as a woman too, and everything that comes along with it. It's a shame to think this book has to come out in a time when it's really more timely and more necessary than ever, given the outbreak of anti-Asian American hate crimes in the United States at the time of this recording. It is for all those reasons and more that the real-life historical excerpts from this story serve to further illustrate why these outbreaks are sadly just the newest incarnation of some very old, very hateful sentiments. Overall, I thought this was another must-read in a series that is quickly becoming one of the most important and thoughtful things on the comic shelf right now, which is why I give it a 9.5 out of 10. Hey there everyone, Cape Joel again, and I want to thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. As always, if you liked what you see, be sure to like, subscribe, comment. It really helps drive engagement and helps me out too. Also, if you are a patron, which you can become for as little as $1 a month, you will get exclusive content that no one else can ever see, and you'll get to see the Comic Multiverse podcast before anyone else too. You can check out all this and more down in the description. And until next time everyone, this has been Cape Joel, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers.